Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John, and this episode was spurred on by listening to an episode of the Cleric's Ringmail podcast. It was an episode published on December the 8th, 2021, so I'm a little bit behind, called I Hate Health Potions. And I'm going to talk a bit about my feelings on that very same subject. Cue the music. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a deep dive on what Taylor put in his episode, although I highly encourage you to go out and listen to it. There's a link to that in the description below. But very briefly, from what I got from the episode, and obviously Taylor, let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth here, is Taylor made the point that OSR gaming has a strong element of strategy, and that having easy access to potions somewhat negated the need to come up with creative solutions to problems. Because, you know, when you face like some mammoth encounter that seems like you can't just go in with the swords and fight your way through it, if you've got healing potions, you're like, well, maybe I'll take that risk because I can always chug a healing potion afterwards and I'll be fine. Whereas if you don't have that safety net, you have to sort of think creatively, oh, do I want to get into this fight? And obviously it doesn't have to be a fight, but, you know, do I want to get into this encounter? Or is there a way I can work my way around it? Can I give myself an advantage of some kind? Whereas Taylor is saying that the health potion actively discourages this creative thinking and is in actuality diminishing the player experience. Taylor also makes the point that it reduces the importance and the uniqueness of the Cleric. It's not an exact analogy because, as Taylor points out, early edition Clerics don't gain spells at first level, and it takes a number of levels for them to have access to serious healing. Plus, they're not heal bots, they have access to many different spells that may be preferable and enable these more creative approaches. Most Cleric powers are supplemental, and Taylor wisely points out that the OG Cleric is based on that sort of Hammer Horror-esque vampire hunter. Also, if healing potions are available, it also makes sickness, disease, etc. in the setting unlikely, because if potions are cheap enough to be available for first level characters, then although it might be out of reach of your average dung farmer, then anyone with a bit of money can probably get hold of a healing potion, and therefore you don't really have to worry about diseases and sickness and stuff like that. And it just creates a lack of consistency. Now, we're not saying that everything has to be realistic in D&D because it's a fantasy game, but certainly for my mind and in Taylor's mind, it would seem from this episode, there has to be a level of consistency within the world in order for the players and the GM to make meaningful decisions based around what is possible and what is not possible. And I often use the obviously overblown example of gravity. We assume in most campaign modes that gravity works pretty much the same as it does on Earth. If you suddenly found out that wasn't the case, how could you make judgments about how to travel anywhere? You know, when you step outdoors, are you just going to drift off into the sky and float away? What would you do? But that consistency of knowing that, yeah, gravity operates mostly in the way we expect it to, enables you to make informed decisions. So consistency and verisimilitude, which I know is a bit of an overused term, but it is important in gaming. Otherwise, if the player characters don't have any way of making meaningful decisions, they're going to be sort of paralysed or get into debates about the minorest of things, and that can bog down your game and slow it down, which isn't a great thing. However, I've also listened to a number of episodes by Old Man Grognard, aka Glenn Hallstrom, where he's talked about the fact that he likes having these sort of like dodgy little magic shops in his games where, you know, you can get healing potions and such like from, but they're not really a sure thing. You know, they're sort of like the second hand fallen off a wagon. Maybe they work, maybe they don't, maybe they have unintended side effects sort of version of healing potions. And I like the sound of that. That sounds fun and interesting. There's an element of uncertainty. It makes them unreliable. It's not just, oh, well, we're going into the dungeon. Right, best make sure we take 10 healing potions with us so we know roughly how much healing we've got on us. I also have the good luck to be playing in a drop-in, drop-out game on Sundays run by Gavin Norman of Old School Essentials fame, where we have available to us certain amounts of lesser healing. So in this game, which is very dungeon centric, most of the sessions focus around exploring the dungeon. Then we leave at the end, we do our little bits of sort of downtime in between it. Then we're straight back into the dungeon. So in this game, Gavin has made available a number of amounts of sort of like lesser healing and various bits and pieces. So in this game, you can buy what's called Quail Marrow. It's these sort of like seed pod like things from a marsh reed. Costs 25 gold pieces a dose. You can chew them, which takes 1 turn, and it heals 1d3 hit points of damage. But you can only use one of those doses every 24 hours, and it takes a turn to eat and chew the quail marrow. So you're paying 25 GP for it. If something hits you and it takes you down to 0 hit points or whatever straight away, you don't have a chance to chew it. It's someone can't just pour it down your throat like a potion of healing if you're knocked out. You have to be capable of chewing the quail marrow to get the benefits, and you're only going to be getting 1d3 hit points every 24 hours. So in this case, it's less like a healing potion and more like, I suppose, emergency triage. If you're lucky, you might get 3 hit points. If you're unlucky, you're just getting 1, and that's your lot for 24 hours. And I really like how this works, because it means even if we've got loads and loads of it in our backpacks, you cannot rely on the fact that it's going to save you all the time. At best, you might get a cheeky couple of hit points back or be able to negate some very minor damage, but it in no way takes away from greater healing abilities like those of a cleric, etc. Not that any of us are really high enough level to be making use of those at the moment. As Taylor was saying in his episode, clerics have to get to a pretty decent level before they get some serious healing, and there's no guarantee they're going to take that option when they do, because there's far more interesting and creative options for them to take. So based around these 3 different ideas, where do I sit on the sort of healing potion vibe? Well, it's no secret that I've never really been a fan of magic shops, etc. in games. Part of the appeal of dungeoneering to me and D&D in general has been the quest to delve into these dungeons and these dangerous places, because they're some of the few places where you can find those healing potions, those magical items. And you might say, well, someone had to make it to put it in the dungeon. But in my mind, and like I said, this is just only my point of view, but in my mind, a lot of this is tied up with the idea of ancient empires that were probably more magically and scientifically advanced than the current world. And that's why there's dungeons there, because they're remnants of these crumbled and long forgotten empires. And likewise with the magic items, there may be things that once were commonplace in this more advanced sort of civilization, but now the ancient old techniques have been lost and they're very difficult to discover. They may be impossible to make, or maybe there are a few people who can do it, but it's only like the 1 or 2 like high level sort of NPCs who exist in the campaign world. And it's not just a case of you're going to be popping down the shop to buy your healing potions. However, I also think there's room, as Glenn was saying in some of his episodes, and as I've said where I was talking about Snake Oil Salesmen in an earlier episode, there's also a sort of space in D&D for people who are hucksters, effectively, people who are attempting to like sell sort of lesser remedies. Whether they work or not depends on your game and the person selling it, but lesser remedies that can sort of like, I don't know, maybe they cure a cold, or they make things feel a little less painful. Effectively, they're the D&D equivalent of taking a couple of paracetamol when you've got a headache. It's not an instant cure-all, but it might help a little bit, although how much of that is psychosomatic depends on the specifics of your game. So I think the ideal sweet spot for me is not to ban healing potions outright, although they should certainly be rare and difficult to get hold of. You certainly shouldn't just be able to load up on them before you go into a dungeon, because I do agree with Taylor, part of the appeal for me with AD&D is people coming up with creative solutions to a problem. And if you can just bounce into everything with your broadsword and be like, well, I'm alright, I've got 16 healing potions in my backpack, I'll be fine, then you don't really need to think about it too much. And it smacks to me more of the sort of like the video game logic, where like, oh yeah, I've got 8 healing potions, so all I've got to do is survive past this baddie, chug a few healing potions, and I'm grand on to the next encounter. And there's nothing wrong with that for computer games. It works absolutely fine. Doesn't really work as well for me with tabletop RPGs. However, I do like this idea of these dodgy sort of snake oil salesmen and the uncertainty that goes with, like, you buy a tonic off some random gimmer in a local village, and he's like, oh yeah, this is a renowned healing tonic. You buy it off them, and then when you go to chug it in a dungeon, when you're in like a life or death scenario, the GM says, all right, roll me a percentile dice to see what the effect of it is. And then suddenly you have that additional sort of ratcheting up of the drama, where not only are you injured, but also now you don't know what this potion's going to do. You have no idea if it's going to heal you, kill you, or have some other random effect, but you're at that ragged edge where you've got no choice. You've just got to risk it, and that could be really entertaining. So I think that's probably where I sit on this matter. So I'm going to put a link to the Cleric's Ringmail episode in the description of this. I'll put a link to Old Man Grognard's podcast as well. I'll also put a link to my previous Snake Oil Salesman episode of this podcast. Check them out. If you'd like to get in touch to tell us what you think about this health potion debate, or maybe just chat about something else to do with RPGs, we might feature you in a future episode. You can leave a voicemail message using SpeakPipe or Anchor, or if you prefer, you could send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So before I go, I just want to thank Taylor from Cleric's Ringmail, Glenn Hallstrom, Gavin Norman, and all the other people who've inspired this episode. Thank you very much. Until we see you again, take care, everybody. Stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.